somebodyness in order to be able to impact and influence others. Even if others would want to make you a nobody, show them you are somebody.
Welcome once more to another episode of Dreams Made Possible, where we share Life 101 conversations for a great life. I'm your host, Botaki Hlalele, a life coach on a mission to cultivate personal mastery and self-worth in others. As we always do on this podcast, we conversate with leaders across different walks of life who have left an indelible mark on others. We conversate to personal development specialists and ordinary folk who have beat the odds to be where they are. Before we continue or dive deep into this conversation, please click on the link below and subscribe so that we can grow a community of dreamers. I'm honored, really honored, and to say I'm honored is an understatement, to have on our couch today, Buyani Zwane. Buyani Zwane defines himself as a strategist, an inspirational talker, and most importantly, the Chief Engagement Officer of an organization called Breakthrough Development. Welcome, Buyani.
Good day to you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for hosting me.
No, thanks. For taking your time to be driving along to come to the east of Joburg for us to have this conversation.
This is LA, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Actually, you said that to me yesterday, and I said, wow, LA. Then I'm going to continue using that. I don't know if there's IP around it, but no. I'm going to use it. Okay. So how we usually like to start the conversation on Dreams Made Possible is to give the viewer the benefit of the person behind whatever role that you play in society. So in a nutshell, if you can walk us, who is Buyani, where did you grow up, and how was it in the setting, whether it's family or the community where you were growing up?
Well, thank you very much again for the opportunity to be able to converse with you, and of course, everybody else who's tuned in to this conversation. I have my roots in Umhlabelingana in northern KwaZulu-Natal. And the beauty about that is that there's a whole lot of mystique around what is in Umhlabelingana. A whole lot of people go there because they assume that we've got some wizardry and some witchcraft and those magical things that get to be in that space. And of course, a lot of people have been there, come back and made it through to the lotto, made it through house betting, all kinds of things. But the beauty about being from that area is that it is the pristine area you could ever go to. It happens to host, among others, the World Heritage Site called Ismangaliso.
Oh, yes.
First declared in South Africa as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So that's where I come from. I was raised up by women. My dad was not there to be able to take good care of this young soul that was going to be growing up to become who I am, 5 decades later. So much of who I am was shaped largely by the woman who raised me. My grandmother, who passed on 33 years ago, has been somebody who was instrumental in shaping me. Incidentally, she had a factor in her face that made it such that she would not be in much community, so because of the deformity that she had. But she was somebody, and she remains somebody who was instrumental in shaping me. My aunt, Jabu, is the one who actually gave me the name Buyani. In parts, Buyani means come back, and it's a Nguni name that applies in the same way in isiZulu, Sixhosa, Siswati, Sindebele, which is about come back. So it has the history of the fact that when my mom was in a final trimester with me, she was staying by herself, and my aunt did not like the idea that I would be born without somebody catching. So it was really a request for mom to come to be with Gogo, so Gogo would play the midwife. That's how I got my name. I was raised by my aunts. My mom had to go and fend for us because, as I indicated, dad was not there. So she became pretty much an entrepreneur in the micro sense of now when we talk SMMEs. So she was a micro entrepreneur in that way, doing quite a lot of her entrepreneurial work across the border in Mozambique and coming back to SA, because our home is pretty much literally 10 kilometers away from the Mozambican border. So in the sense, every Monday, Mom would actually be heading over to the other side, and she would work in Moz for the whole week, and then she'll be back at the weekend and that kind of stuff. So that's a bit about me.
Wow. Now, thanks for sharing that story. And what I like is the meaning that in most cases African names have.
Yeah.
And they define certain things about it, either an event or even predict something about how you will come out into the future.
Most certainly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I just ledge on and applaud the grandmother, the aunt, and the women who played such a critical role in your upbringing.
Yeah.
If you may allow me, let me tap on the issue of the absence of your father.
Yeah.
One, how did it affect you growing up? And secondly, were there other males in the community that would have directly or indirectly played or plugged that gap that a father should play, or the aunt and the grandmother were enough?
Well, the latter part, in fact, we can start with. There were quite a number of male figures around, none that I really could latch onto. So it was really more the maternal influence that played a bigger part in terms of who I am. My uncles would come back during the festive times, so it would be during the Easter time and during Christmas time. So we actually almost had the male presence during those times. But it kind of got used to the fact that they will be coming and they will be gone. So we'll adjust to the people that are around us at that time. The absence of my dad, well, should I say my father, because dad is a different stage altogether. It's an Abba thing that I'd like to be able to, we'll discuss a little bit further as we go along. The absence of my father, in a sense, got me to have to take on the responsibility of looking after their home earlier in life. When he passed, I was 12. And from that age of 12, I had the responsibility, because he would show up during the festive season as well. But he would not be there for that time because he was also catching up with his friends because his friends were also arriving at the same time. So in that sense, therefore, it became crucial for me to be able to take on the family responsibilities early. And as it would have happened for me, is that it was in the same year that I began to find almost like the third father in my life, which is really a divine intervention, as it were, because it was the year in which I got a double promotion, but was prevented from taking that double promotion because I didn't have the money to pay for my fees. But the passing of my dad was the thing that actually unlocked the funding. So I got a scholarship, which then took me away from my village of Kwamahlungulu over to Mazamba, the Star of the Sea, where I was in a boarding house. And then I would be hanging out with a whole lot of boys, and then have a bigger influence of male figures because of the boarding master, the principal, and the other teachers that were there. At the school that I was up in primary, out to St. Joseph's School, there were very few teachers. In fact, you had one teacher who taught 4 classes, and one teacher who taught the other 2 classes. Yes. So in that sense, there was not much of a male influence. But when I went through to Star of the Sea, that's when I began to have the exposure to broader and have people who were not from the village coming through from the city side, because this was kind of like in the build-up to 1976. Yes. So 1975, we began to be able to have folk coming through to the villages to be able to get real good grounded schooling. 1976, of course, there was a much bigger influx of people coming through from Davidson, Soweto, Katlehong, and all of those places, and they came through to the village. Yeah.
Isn't it so true that relationships are a currency of life? That's how I see them. We are hardwired for connection. And because of those connections beyond your family, you became who you became as a result. But the other thing that I really that I like out of what you said is the whole issue of the two events. One, your father not being there and bringing a man in a 12-year-old boy. And later he's passing, unlocking something. And the reason why I'm saying that is because as human beings, I don't think we are trained to look at the brighter side of the bad or the grief or the brighter
tragedy.
side of the dark, of the tragedy, so that we can come out of it. So allow me to take an opportunity. I know you said we'll come to it later, but I don't want to forget that before we go into the leadership conversation, it's about the difference between dad and father. Because I think much as we are going to discuss leadership, one of the things that I would like later for us to get into is to what Robin Sharma calls leading without a title. As individuals, we are leaders in our own right. So I think what you're going to explain, the difference, will help us later when we connect the dots on leadership.
Well, when you get a little bit deeper around the issue of fathering, the loins can release a child. So fathering is very easy. But becoming dad means being intimate, being close, being present, being there in the presence and the raising up of the child. And I often make reference to it when at the cross there is this message that comes through, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. And when you get it translated into the Aramaic, it comes through Abba, Abba, which is like, my dad, why do you leave me at this time of need? I need your intimacy right now, and you're not here. I've had the opportunity of engaging one of my proteges who is now the chairperson of an entity called Dads in the Picture, Zebose Gunene. Amongst the things that we tend to be able to find is that fathers get to father, but do not get to have an opportunity to be able to transfer some of who they are to their children because of the disharmony that is there between the parents. Sometimes mother has beef with the father of the child, and therefore they get to not be able to have the bonding opportunities, as it were. And therefore the child really grows up saying, there is a father, but I don't know who and what he is. Okay. And I grew up in that kind of environment. Fortunately, as I indicated to you, that the women kind of filled that space. And the rural environment I grew up in was one where it was almost common cause that the male folk would be away because of, among others, migrant labor system. So it was anticipated. It was almost common that you would have the male figures showing up when they do show up in these big event times, the Easters and Christmas time. So that's there. But I really want to emphasize that the Abba bit is about how present I am in the life of my child. Because when I am with them, I'm able to talk to some of their growth stages. And I'm able to indicate to them, when you go that route, son, you're going to hurt yourself. And of course, because your hormones are still functioning the way they are, and they're telling you that you are in charge of everything, guess what? I was once there. So I have a sense of what this will land and how it will end. Okay, and you might say to yourself, "No, it was in your times. It's 30 years ago. I'm living in the 21st century." So, son, I know. That's what I said too when I was talking through to my elders at the time. But experience has taught me otherwise. So being dad has that element of we get to be able to spend some time, compare notes. We get to be able to spend some time warning and indicating, when you go this route, things will go well. When you go that route, things may just end up badly.
No, thanks for unpacking that, because I want to believe that it is going to help somebody. because this is one of the, if I may call it that way, social ills that will continue to be with us. And the challenge is upon us to reframe so that those negative experiences do not really eat us alive. And then we can release themselves. And they don't repeat themselves, yes. And I guess now that you say they should not repeat themselves, what you were unpacking, that's what you are doing already with your children, am I right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
No, great.
Yeah. The desire is one of ensuring that the ills of the past do not replay themselves in the current. I'm a follower of the Hebrew history. And every now and again, I get to be able to say, well, a whole lot of people in the three most celebrated faiths and religious backgrounds are Abrahamic. And they go back to Abraham. So whatever it is that Abraham did, Isaac repeated. Whatever it is that Isaac did, Jacob repeated. And somehow what you get to see repeated is where there was a mistelling of the truth. That mistelling of the truth was repeated. Okay, so you have Isaac saying exactly what his father said when he gets through to Egypt. Don't ever say that I'm your husband, say that I'm your brother and we'll be okay. And of course, as it turns out to be, because of the protection around them, the wives do not get to be taken on into the palace and then be turned into the wives of the relative receivers. But had it not been for the fact that there was not a time to spend and explain, when I was going through this challenge, this is how I navigated it. When I was going through this challenge, how I navigated it, there would not have been repeats. But because they did not do that, the repeats showed up.
Wow. No, so true, so true. And it just shows that the whole issue of leadership does not start in the classroom. It starts with in the classroom of life, the University of Hard Knocks, as we would say. Buyani, I would like us to take an opportunity.
Yes.
You are a strategist, an inspirational speaker, and you help organizations and individuals through the whole issue of leadership. Let's start at the beginning. And I know when you go into Google and you press leadership, there are over 2 million definitions of what leadership is all about. Let's make it simple for the viewer. What is leadership?
Well, you've just spoken about one of the things that I do, which is inspirational speaking. So I speak to the spirit. The thing about leadership for me was well defined by a mentor I had the privilege of working with, Stephen Richard Covey. And Stephen R. Covey defines leadership.
There he is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stephen defines leadership as communicating to people their worth and potential so clearly they come to see it in themselves. Now that's a spiritual conversation. It really speaks to the soul. It doesn't speak to the head. It speaks to the soul because you're talking to people's worth and they begin to appreciate, wait a minute, I am somebody. I am a somebody. Martin Luther King Jr. would speak to very much that same story, that you are somebody and find your somebodyness in order to be able to impact and influence others. Even if others would want to make you a nobody, show them you are somebody. Now, the second part of that is not just your worth, but your potential. And the potential aspect has in it 3 legs. P-O-T is pot, which has to do with the cauldron within which people get to be built up. And anytime you're putting anything in a pot that is going to become a meal, you're going to have different ingredients. And those ingredients have got to infuse themselves. And they will have something tasty. If you don't have just one spice, you'll have to have a whole variety of them. And whether it is a vegetarian meal, a vegan meal, or a pescatarian meal, all of those, there will need to be a mixture of sorts. And the people you lead are always a mixture of sorts. Some have got a happy background, some have got a traumatic and tragic background. You need to be able to pull those in one pot and build something really tasty and something that people can look forward to and want to dine in. When you add the E and T, it becomes potent.
Okay.
Now think about that. Anything potent comes in small quantities. And what you find is that until you get to be able to put something that ignites the power in the person, they think they're impotent. Okay? What your time is about unleashing that. And that unleashing requires you to be able to speak to the little they have, which when connected with another will become greater. So as we say, the candle never loses its power by lighting another candle, right?
Yes.
In fact, it increases the glow. And that's what you would want to be able to do. The last three letters, IAL, have got two meanings to it. At a leadership level, you say, I am leading, IAL. On the other side, the person who is being led says, I am learning. And that's a crucial thing, because very often we get to be able to have people, again, repeating same stories because they have not learned. It is in the learning that we are able to become the better version of ourselves. Okay, so take ourselves back into the Hebrew story that I was relating through to you. Had it not been for a woman called Ruth, we would not have gotten Obed, Jesse, David, Solomon. We would not have gotten that. But it was something about a woman called Ruth who eventually got to be married to, then you're ending up with a Boaz. And that Boaz is somebody who was highly influential. His influence is so big that he gets to be able to tell others, listen, that young lady over there, give her the space. She may be Moabite and all, but give her the space. Let her have things that she can take to her mother-in-law. And that gifting is the stuff that makes the learning to happen. And that, to me, is a crucial thing that we don't often get to be able to realize. Leadership that really has impact is leadership that learns from those they have the privilege of stewarding, and then those they steward get to be able to learn from them.
Yes.
So that's that potential, right? So now, if I'm able to communicate that so well that Hlalele sees it in himself, guess what? He's going to be able to unleash the best in everyone else wherever he walks.
Wow. No, that's so powerful. I must say, how you broke down the whole issue of potential, and as you were unpacking it, I started resonating with a lot of things that you were saying, especially around the soul, because I became the person that I believe I became because somebody touched my soul, and I started believing in my self-worth as an individual. And
making dreams possible.
Thanks a lot for that. But here's the question that I have. I love simplicity, and for me, you are simplifying it. Why does it appear that the whole issue of leadership is then made complex? Because if you step into that arena of leadership, I believe it's about building, which is what you said, and making things better than you found them. But it seems like in some quarters, because I don't want to be generic, there are great leaders out there, but there are some quarters who don't grasp that concept of giving people their worth, enriching their souls, and facilitating this learning. Why do you think that is the case?
There is a difference between leadership and leading. Not everybody is actually made out to be a leader. There's some people who all through their lives will follow. They will get a cue from someone else, and then they will come to themselves. They will be able to lead themselves at home in terms of dressing up, in terms of taking care of the family, all those kind of things. But when it comes through to people outside of their nucleus, they tend to be able to find themselves unable to come to. Leadership is a process, and it is important to be able to understand that. It is a process in the sense that it begins with a dream, which is dreams made possible.
Yes.
It begins with a dream. It begins with a vision. When there is no vision, Solomon would say, people perish. When you're a leader and you cannot define the future as it would be to move people from where they are to a better, they're not going to be able to take you as the leader, okay, who's able to take them to better. Eleanor Roosevelt put it beautifully. A good leader takes people to where they want to go to. But A great leader takes people to where they don't necessarily want to go to, but they ought to. Now, that's a crucial distinction. So many a time we're finding ourselves with people who are in positions of leadership, but do not occupy the role, understanding that leading is a choice. Now, that's a very important distinction, because too often we occupy the position and then we think positional power is what we can lean on in order to get people to do things. So you get into this situation where people will be able to say, why should I do this? Say, because I say so. Because I'm the leader, right? Yeah. But if I am an effective leader, I would be able to create the discomfort with the current, so much so that the people that I've the stewardship onto come through and they say, so what should I be working towards? All right? Yeah. What should I be working towards? Talk about dreams made possible. When Martin Luther King Jr. made that speech in August of 1963, it was a very interesting thing, because prior to that, he had been sharing the same message, but people in Alabama weren't getting it. It took him articulating the same on the foot of Abraham Lincoln, and that people began to be, wait a minute, I share that dream. Actually, that dream is in the Constitution.
Correct, yes.
Which is the same story we have in this country. We have a beautiful Constitution that says we, the people, recognizing the ills of the past, want to create something better. Now, that Constitution in and of itself is already telling us there is something better. What we need are leaders who read the Constitution and say, how do I make it come alive?
Yes, yes.
How do I make it come alive? So when I look into circumstances, I look at the things where people are at. I drive through an informal settlement. I drive through a township, and I observe that life hasn't gotten any better. While I have the ministerial responsibility, while I have the member of the executive council responsibility, it is my duty, and that's the thing, it is my duty to at least have one life or two made better by my presence.
No, so true.
And that's a choice of leadership.
Wow.
That's a choice of leadership. And those who are in positions do not make that choice.
Now, talking to the last one about not making that choice, I think you said a very, very profound quote from Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yes.
And I love that quote, to be honest. It resonates with me. And what I want to tap on that quote is, when I look at our country as an example, I think that is the type of leadership that needs to come out and take people where they don't want to go to, but ought to go to.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm testing an assumption here in a question. My interpretation of that is that sometimes you find leaders who are caught in wanting to be liked, in wanting to say things that people want to hear. And if my assumption is right, then that type of leadership will not take people where they are supposed to go. Will you agree with me?
Leadership is not a popularity contest. That has got to be clear. When you take on the role of leader, know for a fact that sometimes you'll say things that are uncomfortable even for yourself. I mean, the quotes that I drew from Martin Luther King Jr. was an uncomfortable thing to be able to say, particularly to the whole lot of Baptist leaders that were there. It was an uncomfortable thing to be able to talk to, that one day my children, black children and white children, will be together? No ways, no. We keep black and they stay white, and that's the way it is. But when you take leadership that really is about creating something that is going to stand out, it is leadership that is not about popularity. Now, let me just also highlight, when you go through history, you will observe that leaders who really have been great have come out of adversity. The ones who actually had an easy life have not been able to make for good leaders. Those who suffered somewhat, whether they were single-parented or some tragedy took place within the family, they're the ones who remember what that was like. And they say to themselves, I will make life better for others. We go through many historical leaders. If you think back, you and I have had an opportunity to hang out with Bonang Mohale.
Yes, yes.
And every now and again, he gets to be able to quote stories relating to Paul Kagame. Okay, now think about the fact that in 1994, when South Africa was going through the rainbow moment, he was walking across from Uganda, going to his home country, which had already had more than 800,000 people decimated 28 years later. You will look at Rwanda, Kigali in particular, and you'll find something that is worth celebrating.
Correct, yes.
Why? He came from conditions of tragedy, and he's saying to himself, in the time that I have, I will impact positively the lives of others.
Wow.
Barack Obama, I mean, there's a whole lot of people who do not quite like him because of whatever reasons. But when you think about his single parenthood, the experience that he had, and when you read through the audacity of hope, which is the story he wrote about his father, and the hope that he had, it is that very thing that makes him way back in 2008 to say, we have been looking for leadership that will bring about change. We are the leaders we've been waiting for.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
So for me then, what I'm wanting to be able to bring across is that it is people who understand that the future and history will read stories about them in the time that they occupied the position of leadership that will either judge them positively or negatively, who are deliberate in terms of their actions. And they say to themselves, I would rather have the people present a story I will be able to celebrate.
So you have answered a question that I hadn't asked, but I'm going to summarize it. You know, when I read Why Nations Fail by the two economists, Dion and Ronald Anderson, the summation that I get there is that, especially that you mentioned Kagame and Rwanda, it's not about the size, it's not about the geography, it's not about the minerals that you have, but
Or don't have.
Yeah. So it's about the willingness. You know, I can think of Al Maktoum, Rashid Albin at Dubai,
Yes.
as an example. I can think of Lee in Singapore.
Yes.
Those leaders who said, you know, we are going to make our nations winners. And so in summary, based on what you said, it seems like there are this, as you say, leadership is a choice. There are these leaders who say, we are going to take this upon ourselves, remain unpopular, and get our nations to where they're supposed to go. But on the other extreme, you have what Miles Monroe calls leadership vacuum. And he says, where there is a leadership vacuum, and he uses the word anything, says anything sprouts out.
Of course.
Why does that seem to be, especially when I look in our context as South Africa, it seems to be that space of vacuum is easily taken up. And those who should do what the governments are doing and the other leaders that you have mentioned seems to be taking a step back, and their voice seems to be lower. And the other extreme, if I may speak of duality, seems to be higher.
There would always be that. I mean, it's a scientific term. People in chemistry and physics would talk to this, that, you know, vacuum, what always happens is that something will take the space of non-used space. That's always the case. But what you're tending to be able to find is that when we have alternatives, we tend to not pay that much attention to shifting what is uncomfortable. In the South African situation, the middle class was grown beautifully for a good 10 years. I can assure you, between 1995 and 2005, we're building the middle class. And the black middle class got to be at a position where now we can afford our own alternative education. We can afford our medical health. We can afford this, and we can afford our own security. So even when the state fails, we have alternatives. And because we've got alternatives and we've got comfort, why bother? And then the voices that really should not be are the ones that are the loudest. And often the loud voices come because of desperation. They're not coming really because they're angry with somebody. They're desperate. They're desperate for leadership that affirms them.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
In my acrostic of leadership, I take lead as representative of 4 key principles. The first principle is love. A real good leader loves the people they lead.
Yes, yes.
They love their country they represent. So they are the ambassador of the country. They are the ambassador of the organization. They are the ambassador of the brand. Okay. You will recall in the days when we were out at Shell, I once shared this conversation with your colleagues then, that we're spending, those of us who sign up for a 40-hour work week, we spend 1/3 of our life at work. If you're spending 1/3 of your life with people you do not love, you're drinking poison and hoping someone else is going to die. Okay? So there's got to be everything that says, I'm going to love the work I do. I'm going to love my colleagues. And someone who was badly raised said, we don't have to like each other. We just have to work together.
Yeah.
That person really was somebody whose mother dropped them with a head. Okay? Because you cannot afford to spend 1/3 of your life in a space you hate.
Correct, yes.
They create toxicity. The E in lead is about equipping. I believe that real leaders will equip the people around them to be able to take over from them and do what they do and do it better. Okay? Now, true leaders who understand what the future holds will be the ones who will say, I would like for you, Tex, to take over this. And I'm grooming you to be able to become better than I am. An organization that is often reported on and researched on, and MIT and Harvard and all of those places, is General Electric. Jack Welch, on one occasion, led this organization for 2 decades. But closer to the end of his 2 decades, he had no less than 10 people who could succeed and take over from him. And as the period narrowed down, it came down to the final 3. And then eventually he tapped on the shoulder of Jeff Immelt to take over from him. And the other 2 immediately were snapped up by the Fortune 50 companies to be able to become CEOs because the equipping had been that good.
Yes.
Unfortunately, most in organizations, even in countries, want to die on the position instead of grooming successors. I believe the success of leadership is in succession. Therefore, invest in equipping. The A in lead is in 2 ways. In a time of crisis, A stands for anticipation. And an effective leader would anticipate what we are going through is likely to translate into, and therefore we need to be able to prepare the environment so that people find faith to carry forward. I say the CEO is actually a chief environment orchestrator. You create an environment within which people will thrive. That's what you do as a CEO of an organization. And whether you're a chief operating officer, again, you organize and orchestrate the environment so that others will thrive. The other A, in normal circumstances, out of crisis, it's about affirming. You often find in organizations that there are people in positions that people do not pay attention to because they are in junior roles. Until we had the situation with COVID-19. You have CEOs stepping into the organization that they lead, and it is the security guard who says, you will or you will not. Okay? Because they had to be confirming that the person is not going to be carrying in the virus to the organization. So that affirmation of a security guard, who actually becomes now the new ambassador of the brand. Okay, the affirmation of the cleaning staff, because unless the environment was sanitized, people would not be allowed into those premises. So hence, they become the essential workers.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the A is about affirming the people in positions that others would look down upon. And then the D is in destinate. And that's a word I've coined. Blame it on Stephen.
Destinate.
Destinate, yeah. And destiny really is about creating the destiny for others so that people know. I mean, in the reading of the Hebrew scriptures, you get to be able to say we are all predestined to achieve. We are all born with the capability. We're engineered for success. Okay? So we're engineered for accomplishment, and we are in the space where we should be able to do all that we can in the time we have so that we have a tribute that can be attributed to us when we're no longer there. So by my ability to define the destiny, I get others to be hungry for that destiny. Now, real leaders would do that.
Great. Wow, that's awesome. And
Sure.
I would like to ledge on the lead from how we capacitate leaders just after maybe if you can just help me with this. And I also like to take the succession discussion further.
Sure.
You mentioned leaders dying in positions. I'll mention two leaders. Probably there are more.
Yeah.
When I look at our own Thabo Mbeki, we know how he was removed from the position.
Recalled.
Yes. And then he went on to create Thabo Mbeki, the Timali Institute at UNISA, and he's developing leaders there. And he has taken a course to negotiate peace in African countries.
Yes.
When I look at the other element on the Western side, there's an Al Gore, who after the vice presidency charted a course in climate change.
Absolutely.
Now, I know those are just two examples, but when I reflect on such, I always ask myself, if such leaders can chart a way beyond their presidency, why would others want to die in those positions?
In my time with Stephen Covey, we got to be able to identify 4 key reasons why organizations fail. One is low level of trust.
Okay.
And people will die in position because they are not trustworthy and they're not trusting, which is why they would always be bodyguarded. Okay, that's one of the key things. The bodyguards for somebody who has been elected by the nation are not necessary, because the nation should be looking forward to embracing you. Why do you get to be guarded? Trust. Second thing is lack of shared vision or shared purpose. People overstay in their positions because they have not even articulated the vision of the future. So they kind of like still see themselves as needing to be there. I mean, after 2 terms in office, you should be handing over. And yet you've got, and I'm making reference to the uncle just south of Kagame. I mean, Museveni has been in that position since Idi Amin. Now, if you are somebody who has clarity of vision, you'd be saying, I need you to take over. Vision casters always have vision carriers. And if you cannot have a vision carrier, it means you don't have a vision. Therefore, you end up with division. That's the thing. The third thing that comes through is that because of low trust and lack of clarity of vision and purpose, you end up with bureaucracy. And bureaucracy in and of itself is a manifestation of systems that are not aligned. So what I'm telling to the people is inconsistent with what I actually do, which then speaks to the I word of integrity. Have you noticed that there's not a single organization that doesn't have the value of integrity?
Correct.
I've yet to find a leader who says integrity is not their value. And yet, we constantly see the growth of internal audit. We see the growth of the legal firms. You go to the richest square mile in Africa, in Sandton. The tallest buildings there belong to law firms. Why is that? Because somebody needs to be defending somebody who said something that they did not really believe in themselves. Okay, so the last part, the reason we've got people dying on the seat of leadership, is because they've been unable to unleash the talent that people carry. Talented people, as Vusi Tembewa would like to be able to speak to, is that talent goes where it is celebrated. And when you're finding people in positions and they're not doing, or they're not afforded the space to be themselves, they'll go elsewhere. And therefore, you end up with, as you said, the leadership vacuum. So the people who are capable of providing leadership move away. And therefore, the gap, the space that's left, are for those who are all noisemakers that the rest of the population do not really like, but they make up the opposition.
Yes,
Okay?
yes.
But they're making all of that noise primarily because they're saying we are yearning for proper leadership.
Wow. Wow. No, that's awesome. Thanks, Buyani, for unpacking this. And I really like to move to the point that you mentioned around succession. And especially the journey that you have taken over almost 23 years with Breakthrough Development and other roles that you played before, because you have been in this people development space.
Sure.
And you articulated so much about what leadership is. So I would like to go to how we create leaders, but let's start with succession. You know, I mentioned Miles Monroe first, and he is one guy that also was so big on succession. And he says in simpler terms that if you do not leave a space for somebody to take over, if you don't train somebody, then you are not a leader.
Sure.
And what I like about him is that he left his children.
Sure.
May his soul rest in peace. But the daughter and the son are continuing the vision.
Monroe International, yes.
Yes. So he lived what he was saying.
Sure.
In your interaction with organizations, why do you think it is so difficult? And please don't throw that question to me, because that has been my space as well. Why has it been so difficult, or why is it difficult to build successes in an organization? And what I've also seen is that we'll always rationalize and say, oh, you know, outside ideas are always important. They'll come and rejuvenate the organization. But by and large, I'm yet to see organizations that are doing this so well.
In part, it's because we are driven by the shareholder.
Okay.
We're not driven by the employee and the customer. Every now and again, you get to be able to hear this story about we're being customer-centric. Like, when did you establish an entity without having to think customer first? You cannot start now being customer-centric. The financial services sector has got this thing now, treat customers fairly. I mean, like, really? Why would you even have to have a campaign on that? Because that's why you were established in the first place. The short-termism that shareholders look into is a thing that forces many a manager, in fact, I wouldn't even say leader, many a manager to not work on their own succession, because they say to themselves, if anything has to be done well, I must do it myself, right? And when that is the case, you're ending up in an environment where you are uncomfortable with ideas that are contrary to what you already know. So therefore, most organizations have got people in positions of leadership surrounded by people who are always agreeing with them and not conflicting. Whereas, in fact, organizations that really get to thrive are the ones that have got people in positions of leadership who say, I need to be transformed myself while I'm transforming their organization. Entities where this has been in place have translated into continuous succession of internal leaders coming into positions so that they actually guide the organization forward. What I also observed is that there is less investment in training and development of future leaders, because we want not to have people fail. We hide failures. So as we look into, think about the mining sector. One of the things that is being targeted is how many months have gone by without a disabling injury. So what ends up happening? If there is an injury, it gets to be hidden.
Under the carpet.
Because we want to make sure that we have these hours, and NOSA is going to give us the 5 stars. So when people do not do what is expected of them, it is shoved under the carpet. Instead of getting people to be recognized when they're doing things right or almost right, so that they will build confidence that I can do this. I can do this. Now, again, if we're to be able to take ourselves historically around organizations where leadership really got to be able to carry on longer term, I notice you've got, among others, people that you celebrate, Paul Jobs. Steve Jobs had a successor before he passed, right? Tim Cook was somebody that he handpicked, right? Because he was somebody that had done a superb job as a head of operations, making sure that when we're looking into the procurement of things that need to be procured, they are procured in the right manner. 2008, when everybody was tanking, Apple had cash awash. Why? Tim Cook had done a good job of working side by side with Steve. Yeah. And as a result, there was not a vacuum when cancer got the better of him. All right. So the organization could carry on. John Doerr was one of the coaches that they were able to get into the organization. And John was able to provide the necessary ear to listen to and advise on. You don't have to be fighting against Google. You don't have to be fighting against Microsoft. You don't have to, in fact, distinguish yourself. Now, imagine when you've got leadership that is about being distinct and standing out. They're not worried about who is going to be able to work down on my legacy. They actually are looking for people who are going to do better than themselves.
Great. But on that note, before we go into how we develop leaders as we get closer to our discussion, I also pick up, and also I don't want this to come as if this is the only truth. I also pick up that organizations seems to hire leaders that seems to be on the narcissistic side of things.
Sure.
And make no mistake, they achieve results. They achieve results.
Yeah, but it's about them.
And how do we break from that cycle?
Well, Jim Collins kind of puts it beautifully for us, and he calls it the level 5 leader. It's a combination of humility and professional excellence. And to get to that is when you say it does not matter who gets the credit as long as the work is done. And drawing back from Lao Tzu, you get this impression that says people will always be behind a leader who allows them to be themselves. At the end of the work that has been done, they say, we did it.
Yes.
That's the crucial thing. Now, organizations, again, somehow we would blame business schools, because in business schools we teach general management. We don't teach leadership, and because of that, we are doing things that make it such that we sustain things that have already been put in place. So when a business plan has been articulated, when an APP, this is what government has, the annual performance plan has been put forward, there is no deviation from that. And because of that pursuit of non-deviation, we restrict creativity, we restrict innovation, we restrict coming on with new things. The reason, we are now on the 3rd anniversary of COVID-19, March 2023, okay? We're in the 3rd anniversary of that. When you think about it, when the declaration of the period of lockdown was announced first time around, what was sought was a management playbook, not a leadership map. So the management playbook, which was, let's do things the way we've done them. But we've never had a pandemic.
Yes.
So if you have not had a pandemic, how can you
What's your
look at
reference
management?
point? Yes.
Right? So you actually needing to be able to release people to think differently. Again, back to Jim Collins, he says, you've got to be able to get your best people to where the opportunities are, not where the problems are. Right? Management and the narcissistic version tend to be placing people to be able to solve problems, not to create new.
Yes.
And that is part of the reason why we're finding that we are not equipping and tooling future managers better.
Okay.
The future, in fact, when you think about it, I share this lately with the most executives that I work with, that right now, we've got about 6 generations at work. We've got the silent generation, the boomer generation, the X generation, the millennial generation, Z generation, and the alpha generation. All of those happening at the same time, unless you are ambidextrous and able to apply yourself to all of those, you are going to stay with what you know and underutilize the ones who are seeing the future before you see it. And therefore, you'll find leaders who are stifled, finding their expression somewhere else, and they come up with a company that will compete against you.
True, eh? That's so true. And you have already answered the question, because I was going to ask if you are making traction in terms of the development of leaders, and maybe we can touch on that. But now, the question that I want to ask, I would assume that when a leader go into a business school or into a classroom or whatever form of learning, the ideal is about transformative learning.
Sure.
But I have seen leaders going into classrooms, coming back the same. The same. Is it because of the focus on general management as an example? Or is it an issue of personalities that someone says, you know what, this is just an event for me. I'm going to attend the classroom, but I'll remain who I am. Is it a question of the specialists in this area missing the mark about how to develop these leaders?
It's all of that plus. It's a transaction. When training is a transaction, it's the box that's going to be ticked. Often, I spend a lot of time in the business schools, and I've taught in a number of them. We are in a program, we are at the height of what makes for a great leader, and a phone rings. Right as we are delving into a case study, the person is called out. And they go and they answer that. By the time they come back, they've lost the lessons, they've lost the conversation that was taking place. Why? Because there is the now thing that is pressurizing them at work. So they are here, but they're not here. They're listening to the OJs. The body's here with me, but the mind is on the other side of town. So they're there in physical sense, but they're emotionally not there. So that's why you often find people go through a program, and it is sanctioned in the C-suite. It is sanctioned by the executive of the organization. And yet, there is not an expectation and a requirement for the return on that investment.
Wow.
Because you got to be able to tick. The CETA is going to be able to pay back by all means, so we can record. Oh yeah, you need to have some NQF5, NQF6, NQF7. Okay, that's fine. We've got that on record. But it does not really get to be touching on the transformation the organization needs. Remember, leadership is about transforming. Management is about transacting. And many who get to be taken to business schools are kept at a transacting level. Because transform in and of itself is about creating a form that is different to what we had. Remember the word trans is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crossing over. Now, a whole lot of people do not want to cross over.
Yes.
So let's stay on this side of the Jordan River.
Oh, they know.
The other side could be problematic. And yet, if you take the historical, again, the Hebrew history, until such time that there is a leader who's willing to be able to dip their toe in the water, there will be no parting of the waters, right? So there is a need for somebody to be courageous. There's a need for somebody to be able to break out of the mold, the way things have been done. There's a need for somebody to be able to say to themselves, we want to be able to create something that others will look at and say, it was the class of 2023 that opened the path for us.
Correct.
Leaders are supposed to be pathfinders after all.
So going into the future, you mentioned different generations, and let's take the last two, mainly the alpha generation.
And the Z.
And the Z. They come in different mindsets. And you were right. The leaders who cannot adjust and grow with time, they are usually left behind. But from a leadership development point of view, consultants, specialists in that area, business schools, already adjusting how to educate, if that is the right choice of word, this new generation going forward?
Some are. I mean, I have the fortune of being at the University of Pretoria's Gordon Institute of Business Science, and one of the cohorts that gets to be brought in virtually every year is the Spirit of Youth. And that Spirit of Youth is incorporating the youngest generation ever and getting them to exchange ideas amongst themselves with a mentor who happens to be from a Y generation or a Z, X generation. So in that sense, there is a space for them to be themselves. I have my cousin, Stephen Zwane. He also is somebody who has an entity called Y-Led. And in that, he goes into great lengths to be able to get the youth. You spoke about mindset. In and of itself, there is a mental framing that people come with. You cannot see the outside for as long as you're in the frame. So you need to be able to come out of the frame and open your eyes to what's available outside. And you also have to have the bravery to touch into territories you've never been to. Okay? Now, that requires first a listening. Okay? I share this in relation to transformational leadership as comprising of 4 simple things. I like 4s. First thing, you've got to be able to focus. If you can focus the Z generation and the Alpha generation in the creation of a future that outperforms what the X and the Y did, you then will be able to get them thinking the future. And they will be acting in that fashion. The L is about listening. Okay? And if we're able to listen, not just with the ears, but also listen with our eyes for the gestures and also with the heart for the emotion, we will find that the people that we are with are going to connect with us even better. Remember, Madiba used to be able to say that you can speak to anybody in any language and you will speak to their head. But you speak to them in their own language, you speak to their hearts. And that's the thing you wanted to be able to do. So when you're dealing with the Z gen and Y and the Alpha gen, you want to be able to speak to their hearts. When you speak to the heart, you are actually providing what they're not getting at home. At home, father and mother are so busy being busy that they're not even listening to their children. So that listening is a very crucial thing. The I is about involve. The youth will celebrate and really build on something that they have been involved in. I love the fact that there was a time when we were working with people with disabilities as it was defined then, and of course now it's differently abled persons. They said, nothing about us without us.
Correct, yeah.
Now, you got to do the same thing with the Z generation and the Alpha gen. Involve them in the crafting of what the future is going to be. If you don't involve them, there will be no ownership, no involvement, no commitment. The last thing is P, personalize. The youth are going to be able to own and want to be a part of what you do when you are personalizing it. The thing about devices we have, each one of them have got the number that is distinct to you.
Yes.
There is not a single cell phone that has got the same screen as the next person, because we've personalized it. So the same thing would be necessary with the generations that are the youngest generation. And of course, we know that in 7 years' time, in 2030, more than 60% of the workforce will be generation Y, Z, and Alpha.
Wow.
If that is that's in fact is the inheritance we have, we need to be able to ensure we're personalizing the workspace, we're involving them in what we do, we listen to their cry, we do the nurturing necessary, and we focus the energies to stay purposeful. So that you can put as an acrostic flip.
And I like it because this puts a challenge to the leaders. And I'm just thinking of the Greek way of leadership in terms of talking about the ethos, appealing to trust and authority, and then the pathos, the beliefs, and the emotion and the logos about the reasoning and the logic. And all these three should play together. But if you are a leader and you focus on only one, then you're going to miss the important thing of growing together with the generation that you spoke about. Buyani, we have unpacked so much, and I really, really appreciate. So,
you're welcome.
On this platform, we always say we end up with Life 101 lessons that we'd like to leave to the leaders, to the viewers out there. You have been in the leadership development space for a long time.
Yes.
And when we go to university, we do Leadership 101. I would like to change it from Lesson 101 to Leadership 101. What would be that Leadership 101 lesson that you would like anyone, whether they have no people reporting to them, or they have got a team of 200 people, or they are leading a country. What is that Leadership 101 that you, in your journey, you realize that it makes a difference? And I know it's difficult because leadership is broad.
Albert Schweitzer put it beautifully. At one time, he was the General Secretary of the United Nations. He spoke about the fact that in each and every one of us, the fire inside kind of dies. And we are grateful to the ones who reignite that fire. If anything, as a leader, leadership one-on-one, it's about ensuring at least 6 people are going to be people who are touched by you so well that they're able to give the tribute statements when you know more. Tributes come through because you've contributed. If you have not contributed, you cannot expect tributes. Now, I always work on the number 6 because at least you need 6 people to carry your casket. So if you don't have 6 people who are really excited about you, who are telling the story about you, something has not happened. So first and foremost, think about the fact that it is my task and your task as a leader to ignite the fire in others. If we can do that, we will get them to have reason to wake up. I share this every now and again. JOB is the journey of the broke. And a lot of people are stuck in that journey of the broke, where they've got more of the month at the end of the money. And that's not a healthy space to be in. However, when people are going to work, the why of rising known, they are purposeful. And leadership is about defining purpose. Why do I exist? Why does this organization exist? Why do I come to this organization? When the why is clear, the how is easy.
Buyani, on that note, I would like to thank you so much. As I have said, it's an understatement to say we are happy that you are here. The viewer at home, if you have not been challenged to change your perspective about what leadership is, think again. There are a lot of nuggets that have been left in this conversation, and I urge you to go back and challenge your own view of what you thought of leadership. That would either make you change how you approach things or to strengthen the good that you are already doing. In our own individual right, we are leaders, and we need to touch someone and touch that soul so that we can make a difference in whatever walks of life we find ourselves in. Until the next episode, thank you.